with news at Prime tonight. The Road Freight Association has warned that consequences of the recent riots will lead to higher unemployment as some companies close for good. At least 33 trucks were set alight and several warehouses were looted and torched in last week's deadly violence. My next guest says fixing problems in the rail sector is imperative to job creation. However, it can only happen within the context of strong political support and leadership. For more on this, we're joined by Mirai Rail Corporation Managing Director, Pulane Tshabalala Kingston. Good evening to you, and thank you so much for your time. Firstly, when we take a look at the rail sector overall in this country, it has been plagued by bad management. The infrastructure has run into ruins, and, you know, before we can even talk about creating opportunities, so much has been lost in terms of preserving and maintaining just what we've had over the years.
Good evening, Kathy, and thank you for having me on your program. I think the first place to start, just to contextualize things and to get ourselves in the right frame of mind, is to just remind ourselves of our levels of unemployment. So our unemployment statistics rose to an all-time high in the first quarter of this year, with levels reaching 33% on a narrow definition and 43% on a broad definition. And in addition to that, the unemployment rate insofar as the youth is concerned sits at 65%. That makes up 37% of our population and talks to 19.1 million people in this country. I think it's important before we assume that all of the challenges in the rail sector started at the dawn of our democracy. They in fact did not. There is an interesting history, if you will allow me to quickly summarize it, that takes us to that explains why we have found ourselves where we are in part, and that of course isn't to undermine the subsequent challenges around vandalism, around corruption, around mismanagement. But if we just take a step back to thinking through the history of what was called the South African Rail and Harbours, which was the precursor to Transnet, the reality is that this was established as a way of transporting our minerals from pit to port. And historically, you had a disparate number of black labor working within the rail industry. But as a result of following the interwar period, as in between World War I and World War II, and subsequent to that, as a consequence of the global agricultural crisis, most of the black labor was displaced by poor white laborers. And this began what I would characterize as South Africa's most successful extended works public program. So what this program did was it created, first of all, it got rid of all of the black people who worked in the industry in the first instance. It also developed white labor. It served as a springboard for the creation of blue-collar workers by providing technical training. It provided administrative jobs. It provided housing programs along the railway line. And most importantly, I would say, is the fact that it provided stable income for white railway workers. A stable income means a stable home, means a stable education for your children. And what happened at this time was that you had a whole generation of railway workers who were able to send their children to schools in the areas, in the communities around the railway lines that they were building or expanding or refurbishing. And in addition to that, that led to Africana University's coming to life and people being able to send their children to those schools. And that then produced a new generation of Afrikaner white railway workers. Now, during the 1960s, and sorry, this led, of course, to a significant number of white Afrikaners being unshackled from the burden of poverty. So you have people moving up the ranks from states of poverty into a new middle class. If we then reflect on what happened in the period immediately prior to the advent of democracy, I would say three critical things need to be borne in mind. The first is the fact that with the liberalization of the laws around freight rail, one saw more and more freight traffic being moved onto the roads. Secondly, there was a significant level of underinvestment into what is now known as Transnet as a result of sanctions in the main. And then of course, thirdly, we had a situation where you also had SOEs which continued to go down this path of losing technical skills. So those three factors were devastating for any new government that was coming into power, because they weren't aware, in particular, of the extent to which Transnet, for instance, had been hollowed out. So when we talk about the challenges that have then come to pass and that we speak about in the context of corruption and in the context of mismanagement, etc., I think it's important for us to understand the background and the context. Because frankly, my sense is that despite these challenges, the railway industry is perfectly poised to play a role in reducing unemployment, because based on the history that I set out earlier, Transnet was in fact one of the largest employers in the country. And there's no reason why we should not get there. We have the blueprint that already exists. That blueprint is in the form of what is called the market demand strategy that was launched in 2012. And subject to us revisiting that strategy, taking into account our new reality, there is no reason why we shouldn't be able to use our rail network in order to foster economic growth, create jobs, and increase freight volumes. Sure. That's my sense.
And to the extent that even when we look at this market demand strategy, Transnet has not been able to meet some of the targets that it has made in that strategy. It hasn't been able to live up to the expectations and even policy direction in that strategy. What does that mean for the sector?
I think it poses a significant challenge to the sector, because the market demand strategy was meant to increase volumes by 2019. It was a 7-year strategy. And the majority of those targets have not been met. Does it mean that we are able to work towards meeting those targets now that we understand the extent of the challenges that lie before us? Of course we can. We have new management, new leadership at both Transnet and Prasa, who, yes, have inherited challenges. But it looks to me as though there are green shoots of hope. The minister recently announced a 57 billion rand allocation from his budget insofar as Prasa is concerned. And one is seeing that there is traction around converting the policies and the plans into implementation. So we are starting to see RFPs coming out. We are starting to see more tangible engagement with the private sector. And yes, it's going to take a while, because there has been significant destruction of the railway system, not only in the context of the primary industries, but also the secondary industries where you have your downstream industries which manufacture components, which manufacture spare parts. But not only that, there has been a compromise to those industries that are so critical in growing this economy, because we haven't been able to provide the necessary volumes, for instance, to the mining industry or to the agriculture industry or other industries that are critical to our growth from an economic point of view. Because, for instance, if you are not able to secure volumes for a mining house, they're certainly not going to be expanding their mine, or indeed, they're not going to expand their mine or reinvest in upgrading their existing mines. It's easier for them, for instance, from an iron ore perspective, for them to simply move their operations and open up mines in Brazil, for instance,
sure,
or even Australia. And that's just the way, I guess, global economy works. But I remain hopeful that with the necessary leadership and with the necessary political will, we should be able to achieve, we should be able to begin the journey of turning our rail industry around. You know, I'm reminded of the fact that we recently signed up to the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which aims to grow our cumulative GDP from $2.7 trillion to $6.7 trillion by 2030. Now, in order for this to occur, you have to have the ability to move people as well as to move freight. And the only way that you do that, or you're able to do that, is if you have a sustainable, efficient, and safe railway network.
One of the things that private players are often positing is that the only way to truly be able to move the rail sector into the next level effectively is if private players are given more opportunity to help in terms of building up some of the infrastructure. What's your view on that? Is that truly the answer?
So I think in the final analysis, just from a pure competition point of view, of course, additional players means competition, and it forces your state-owned enterprises to pull up their socks in terms of their efficiencies and so on. But the reality is that in the context of third-party access, which is what I think you're talking about, in the context of rail companies wanting to be able to operate on the railway network by paying a tariff. The reality is that the only way that it will be successful is if simultaneously with this, you are able to find a mechanism that ensures that you fix the infrastructure network itself. Because there's no point in the private sector introducing new locomotives onto the line when your railway line in and of itself needs to be upgraded, needs to be refurbished, because that's not going to enable the efficiencies that we're all hoping for. So it's a two-way. You know, there's a lot more than just third-party access being the panacea for all of our ills.
Pulane Tshabalala Kingston, let's leave it there for tonight. She's with Mirai Rail Corporation.